What's up fam, Retro here, and today we're diving into Final Fantasy X. Now I know y'all are always looking for ways to max out your characters, and Overdrive Modes are the key to that power boost. But the real question is the Slayer Overdrive Mode the best in the game? Stick around, we're about to break it all down. For those of you who might be new here, let me give you a quick rundown. In Final Fantasy X, Overdrive Modes are game changers. They are your strategy modes to help you dominate your fights with overdrive attack. So if you need a specific strategy to fight enemies, think no other than Overdrive Modes. And today, we're putting the spotlight on the Slayer Overdrive Mode. We're gonna see if it's really the MVP of Overdrive Modes or just overrated. And hey, if you're into Overdrive Modes as much as I am, make sure you check out my playlist dedicated to every single one in the game. I got you covered with all the tips and tricks you ever need. In this video, we're gonna break it down, comparing Slayer to other Overdrive modes, laying out the strategies, and seeing if Slayer really lives up to the hype. Now keep in mind, everything I say here is strictly my opinion. You might agree, you might disagree, but that's what makes these discussions so fun. So let's get into it. Alright, let's break down what the Slayer Overdrive mode is all about. In Final Fantasy X, each character can charge up their overdrive gauge in different ways, and these ways are called Overdrive Modes. Now the Slayer Overdrive mode is pretty straightforward but super effective. With Slayer equipped, each time your character defeats an enemy, their overdrive gauge gets a nice boost. It's like getting rewarded for kicking some So if you're out here slaying fiends left and right, that overdrive gauge is gonna fill up real quick. This makes Slayer a fantastic choice for characters who are all about dealing heavy damage and taking down enemies fast. Unlocking Slayer is pretty simple too, which is great if you're just starting your journey in Final Fantasy X. You can actually learn this mode pretty early in the game. For instance, on your way to kill a Kaport while you're fighting off those sin spawns, your characters can learn the Slayer mode just by defeating enemies. There are various ways to pick it up, so whether you're a newbie or an OG making your way back into the game, just keep slaying those fiends and you'll unlock it in no time. What sets Slayer apart from other Overdrive modes is its efficiency in random battles and grinding sessions. Every time you defeat an enemy, your overdrive gauge charges up by 20%. So in battles where you're facing multiple enemies, you can easily fill up that gauge multiple times within a single fight. This makes it perfect for those when you're grinding or farming for items or just trying to level up your party. It's all about maximizing those overdrive gains, making your characters even more powerful as you go. Slayer is definitely a go-to mode if you're looking to dominate the battlefield and keep that overdrive gauge full. Now, let's talk about why Slayer mode might be your new best friend in Final Fantasy X. One of the biggest pros of this mode is how quickly it can build up your overdrive gauge. Thanks to the Slayer's ability to gain overdrive from defeating enemies, it's hands down one of the fastest ways to charge it up. This is especially true in battles when you're up against multiple enemies. Every enemy you take down adds a chunk to your overdrive. So if you're mowing through a group of fiends, you'll find yourself ready to unleash powerful overdrives in no time. This can be a game changer, homie, especially when you need that extra burst of power to get through tougher battles or when you're just trying to speed up your progress. Another huge benefit of Slayer is how perfect it is for grinding. When you're grinding, you're often fighting weaker enemies over and over to level up, farm AP, or collect items. With Slayer equipped, not only you are charging your overdrive gauge rapidly, but you're also getting extra rewards for overkills. Every time you overkill an enemy, meaning you deal more damage than it is needed to defeat them, you have a higher chance of getting rare drops and more AP. This makes Slayer a fantastic choice when you're in those heavy grinding sections of the game, maximizing your efficiency and rewards. Slayer Overdrive mode is also highly compatible with certain characters in the game, particularly those with powerful overdrive abilities like Auron, Tidus, and Lulu. Auron's overdrive are all about dealing heavy damage, and with Slayer, he can charge up that overdrive quickly by cutting down enemies left and right. Tidus also benefits greatly, especially in situations where you need his overdrives like Bliss Ace, Slice and Dice, or Energy Rain ready to go in rapid succession. And let's not forget about the Black Magic Queen, Lulu herself. While her Overdrive Fury may not be about dealing single massive damage, Slayer can still work wonders for her. By equipping Slayer and casting powerful spells like Ultima, she can finish off multiple enemies at once, quickly filling her Overdrive gauge. Although anyone can learn the Ultima spell, it's a great early game option for Lulu due to her magic stat, allowing her to wipe out enemies effectively and to get the most out of the Slayer mode. This makes Slayer incredibly versatile, catering both physical attackers and magic users alike. While Slayer Overdrive Mode has its perks, it's not without its downsides. One of the major cons is its limited use in boss battles. Unlike regular encounters, bosses are usually much tougher and defeating them isn't as frequent as taking out standard enemies. This means that Slayer's effectiveness takes a hit when you're up against these powerful enemies. Since you can't rely on constant enemy defeats to fill up your Overdrive gauge, Slayer can become less useful in these high stakes, slower paced fights. Another point to consider is the situational effectiveness of Slayer. This mode excels in random encounters where you're fighting multiple enemies, but it might not be the best fit for every scenario. For instance, when dealing with the Malboro, an enemy that uses devastating status effects like the bad breath, and I promise you that Confuse is the worst when that gets on you, bro. However, in these cases, you're often better off focusing on strategies that address the Malboro's unique threats rather than relying on the Slayer to build up your Overdrive gauge. Comparing Slayer to other Overdrive modes can also highlight its limitations. Take the Warrior Overdrive mode for example. Warrior charges up by dealing damage, so it's effective in both random encounters and boss battles alike. This mode ensures that as long as you are actively attacking, you're building up your Overdrive gauge, making it more a consistent choice. Then there's the Comrade Overdrive mode, which charges when your allies take damage. This can be particularly useful in tougher battles where your team is taking heavy hits frequently, ensuring that you're still gaining Overdrive even if you're not dealing direct damage yourself. So while Slayer has its strong points, these comparisons show that it may not always be the top pick depending on your situation and playstyle. Let's dive into how Slayer stacks up against other Overdrive modes, starting with Warrior. Both Slayer and Warrior are strong contenders, but they serve different purposes, homie. The Warrior Overdrive mode charges up your Overdrive gauge based on the damage you deal. This means as long as you are actively attacking, your gauge fills up, making it a reliable choice for consistent Overdrive generation. It's particularly advantage in tougher battles and boss fights because it doesn't rely on the frequent of enemy defeats. Warrior ensures that your Overdrive gauge keeps building up as long as you're landing hit, which can be crucial in prolonged encounters where you need a steady stream of Overdrive for powerful attacks. On the flip side, Slayer is designed to shine in situations where you're facing multiple enemies in random encounters. Its strength lies in the fact that every enemy you defeat boosts your Overdrive gauge by a significant amount. This makes Slayer perfect for grinding sessions where you're up against weaker foes and need to rack up Overdrives quickly. However, Slayer may not be as effective in tougher boss battles where you're not defeating enemies as often, making Warrior a more dependable choice for those scenarios. For a big primary example, take Seymour's first boss battle as an example. Now let's compare Slayer to the Comrade Overdrive mode. Comrade charges up your Overdrive gauge whenever your allies take damage. This can be incredibly useful in battles where you're taking heavy hits and need to build up your Overdrives for a comeback. Comrade is especially effective in boss battles where your team might be getting pummeled, ensuring that your Overdrive gauge fills up even when you're not dealing direct damage. In contrast, Slayer's effectiveness drops when you're not frequently defeating enemies. While Slayer is a great Overdrive mode for grinding and farming, farming, Comrade's utility in high damage situation makes it a solid choice for boss fights or challenging encounters where you're facing heavy resistance. This can be particularly useful against enemies like the Dark Aeons in the game. You know Dark Aeons hit extremely hard, brother. So most of the time, Comrade is needed. So when is the Slayer the optimal choice? Slayer really shines in scenarios where you're farming for items or leveling up. Its ability to rapidly fill the overdrive gauge by defeating multiple enemies makes it ideal for grinding sessions where you're up against weaker foes. For example, if you're working on collecting rare items or leveling up your characters by fighting low-level enemies, Slayer's efficiency can make the process much quicker and more rewarding. Additionally, if you're in a part of the game where you're facing a lot of weaker enemies in quick succession, Slayer can help you rack up overdrives faster than any other mode, making it a go-to choice for those grind-heavy moments. Let me share a bit about my personal experience with the Slayer Overdrive mode. When you're rocking with a high strength stat, Slayer is a beast. I found that with characters like Orin and Tidus who pack a punch, you can pretty much wipe out enemies in any random encounter without breaking a sweat. This makes Slayer incredibly efficient for filling up your overdrive gauge quickly. It's all about taking advantage of those frequent enemy defeats to keep your overdrive ready for action. However, if your strength stat isn't up to par or is very low, Slayer can feel pretty useless. If you're struggling to defeat enemies swiftly, you're not gonna get the overdrive gauge to fill up effectively. In those cases, you might find yourself better off using a different overdrive mode that aligns better with your current situation. Personally, I tend to use Orin and Tidus for Slayer, but I also mix it up with characters like Riku or Kamari from time to time. Now, you may be wondering why. Well, Riku's items, for an example, like Petrify Grenade, works fantastically with the Slayer Overdrive mode. You can use these items to quickly turn enemies into stone and clean up the battlefield real quick. This combo lets you get in and out of encounters quickly by maximizing your efficiency when you're farming or grinding. It's a neat trick to make the most out of the Slayer mode, especially when you need to speed up the process and make the most out of every battle. Alright, let's wrap this up and recap what we've covered about the Slayer Overdrive mode. We've seen that Slayer's biggest strength, its ability to quickly fill up your overdrive gauge by defeating enemies. It's a powerhouse when you're grinding, allowing you to rack up overdrives in random battles and maximizing your efficiency in farming sessions. On the flip side, Slayer has its downside, especially in boss battles where its effectiveness diminishes due to a fewer enemy defeats. It also might not be the best choice in every situation, like when facing enemies with specific strategies or heavy hitting enemies. When we stack Slayer up against other overdrive modes like Warrior and Comrade, it's clear that Slayer has its niche. Warrior is a more reliable and consistent overdrive gain in both random encounters and boss fights, while Comrade shines in situations where your allies are frequently taking heavy damage. Slayer is definitely the champ in quick grinding and random battles against multiple enemies, but it might not be the top pick for all scenarios. So is Slayer the best overdrive mode in Final Fantasy X? In my final verdict, I think that it's absolutely a top contender for specific playstyles and situations. If you're all about rapid overdrive builds during grinding and random encounters, Slayer can be incredibly powerful. However, for boss battles or scenarios where enemy defeats are less frequent, other overdrive modes might serve you better. It's all about matching the modes to your gameplay needs. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Slayer is the best mode, or do you swear by another one? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm eager to see what you think. And that wraps up for today's video. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on any other future content. I got some cool videos coming up later on in the future, so stay tuned for more epic Final Fantasy X insights and gameplay tips. I'll catch y'all in the next one, homie. Peace out.